Okay, so listen, you folks have nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about. Donald Trump has assured everybody that Social Security is not going to be touched.
Security will not be touched. It'll only be strengthened. We have illegal immigrants on Social Security, and we're going to find out who they are and take them out. We have illegal immigrants in other Medicare. We found a lot of bad people, a lot of people that shouldn't be on, that were put on through California. A lot of them come out of California. We're not going to stand for that. So we're going to strengthen our Social Security, et cetera. We're not going to touch it other than to make it stronger. But we have people that shouldn't be on, and those people we have to weed out. Most of them, or many of them so far, have been illegal immigrants. They shouldn't even be in the country.
All right, so that is very reassuring. So he doesn't want to touch Social Security, except that apparently there's an enormous problem, not a random case here and there. There's an enormous problem of illegal immigrants without the benefit of a Social Security number somehow managing to get Social Security. It's an enormous problem. It's an enormous problem. That is their only concern. Republicans have always been very honest when they express their intentions about Social Security, as we will see. So let's so this article breaks down some of the history of Republicans. This was compiled by the AFL-CIO in regards to Social Security. So let's look at some of the lowlights. 1935, almost all Republicans in Congress opposed the creation of Social Security. 1939, 75% of Republicans in the Senate try to kill legislation providing Social Security benefits to dependents and survivors, as well as retired workers. 1950, 79% of the House and 89% of the Senate Republicans vote against disability insurance to defeat it. 1956, 86% of Republicans in the Senate opposed disability insurance. Let them sell pencils, they called it, the Let them sell pencils Act. Program approved nonetheless. 1964, Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater and future President Ronald Reagan both suggest that Social Security be made voluntary. Now, I am sure that Barry Goldwater, when he spoke about Social Security, expressed that to potential voters.
Social Security is a contract between the federal government and you. I don't believe in breaking contracts, and I have never at any time advocating doing away with Social Security. Now, what I am concerned about, though, is the fact that you, all of us, paying our money in, paying our dollars into Social Security, when we get to the age to get it back, we're not going to get our dollar back. This is what I'm trying to talk about in Social Security. I'm trying to get the older people and the younger people to realize that if this kind of wasteful expenditure continues in our government, that when it comes time for them to get their Social Security, they're not going to do too well. And I don't think you have to go further than to ask the recipient today of Social Security if they're living very high off the hog. And they're not.
You see, Barry Goldwater doesn't want to get rid of Social Security. He's really worried that you're not going to get your Social Security. That's his only concern. And remember, he's saying this at a time when the country's demographics were very different, when you had more than enough younger workers paying into the trust fund to pay for Social Security, as far as the eye could see. So what he's talking about here, that, oh, we're spending too much money, just absolute bullshit in that historical moment, just absolute nonsense. 1965, 93% of Republicans in House and 62% in Senate vote to kill Medicare. 77, 58% of Senate votes against amendment to provide semi-annual increases. Again in 77, 88% of Republicans in the House and 63% in the Senate vote against an increase in Social Security payroll tax needed to keep the system solvent. 1981, President Reagan proposes $35 billion in Social Security cuts over the next 5 years. The cuts would have included the elimination of student benefits, lump sum death benefits, and a retroactive elimination of the $122 minimum benefit for 3 million recipients. Congress ultimately enacted $24 billion of the proposed cuts. Again in 1981, the Reagan administration begins a wholesale review of the Social Security disability rolls, resulting in over 560,000 eligibility investigations in 1982, 360,000 more than the year before. Ultimately, at least 106,000 families were removed from the rolls. Still, he was on a roll in 81 here. 99% of Republicans in House and 98% in Senate vote for legislation containing $22 billion in Social Security and Medicare. Now, look, I don't want to get too personal here, but I'm going to tell you something, because I know you're going to have, probably inspired by our favorite author, A. Chud. You're going to get people saying, see, but those people who got purged from the rolls, see, they found fraud in the system. You know, one of the people who got purged from the rolls? My mother, who was disabled from birth, got purged from those rolls. Had to borrow money from my grandfather until after months of fighting, she finally got her funding restored. So I have some personal experience of what the consequences of these policies were.
Yeah, and these numbers can appear deceptively small because don't forget, these are 1981 dollars. So I just put it into a calculator just so I could make this point, because $35 billion 1981 dollars accounted for inflation today is $120 billion.
81, Reagan administration proposes a 3-month delay in 1982 cost of living increases. Again in 81, Reagan administration proposes $200 billion in Social Security cuts between 82 and 1990. The cuts include a reduction in early retirement benefit, tightened disability eligibility standards, delay in the 1982 cost of living adjustment, and a 10% eventual reduction in benefits for all new retirees. The U.S. Senate repudiated the president's proposals by a vote of 96-0. Now 82, still at it. President Reagan and Senate Republicans proposed $40 billion in benefit cuts over 3 fiscal years. 85, Reagan administration backs attempts by Republican Senate leadership to eliminate the 1986 Social Security COLA. Vice President Bush cast the tie-breaking vote to eliminate COLA. That's the cost of living adjustment.
Yep.
House defeats it. It was never enacted. Okay, so Reagan, I am sure, in 1984, he was very honest about his views and intentions with Social Security, just like Donald Trump, I'm sure, is being very honest and forthcoming about his thoughts on Social Security.
Let's lay it to rest once and for all. I told you never would I do such a thing. But I tell you also now, Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit.
Wow.
Social Security is totally funded by the payroll tax levied on employer and employee. If you reduce the outgo of Social Security, that money would not go into the general fund to reduce a deficit. It would go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security has nothing to do with balancing a budget or erasing or lowering the deficit.
So not only did Ronald Reagan promise he wouldn't cut Social Security, even though by that time he had repeatedly been trying to cut Social Security, he says that it has nothing to do with the deficit, so I guess he was just motivated by pure evil. He's not even saying it has anything to do with the deficit. I'm just an evil bastard.
Right.
I just don't like the idea of old people eating human food. I want them eating Alpo.
Right.
So yeah, wow. Okay. All right. So that's what he had to say about Social Security. Very different from his actions behind the scenes. He was obviously so hostile to it that he constantly was trying to make cuts to Social Security in one way or another. 2005, a labor-led fight against privatization saved Social Security for the time being. 2006, President George W. Bush once again introduces privatization of Social Security in his 2007 budget. Now, to be fair, I want to make it clear this is coming from the AFL-CIO, so they only talked about Republicans, the articles from 2006. That's why it doesn't go any further than that. They continued. Paul Ryan wanted to privatize Medicare. But hey, Joe Biden, this is when he had 3/4 of a brain, not just half a brain, as the Joe Biden that just presided over the country did. Here's Joe Biden talking about Social Security.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time.
Very proud of it.
Somebody has to tell me in here how we're going to do this hard work without dealing with any of those sacred cows. I meant every single solitary thing.
That's Bernie's good friend Joe Biden. His good friend Joe Biden, who he didn't have the balls to call out on that until it was too late to save him, and even then very mildly. And hey, not just creepy Uncle Joe. Clinton wanted to privatize Social Security. According to 3 former top administration officials, President Clinton was strongly considering the partial privatization of Social Security prior to his impeachment in 1999. The revelation was contained in a paper delivered by David Wilcox, an Assistant Treasury Secretary, Douglas Emmeldorf, a Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary, and Jeffrey Lieberman, I dated that guy's daughter, an aide with the National Economic Council. Different Jeffrey Lieberman. So, we don't have to get into details. So, no, that guy was a filmmaker, actually. Barack Obama once proposed cutting Social Security. Now, there's just a little side note. You want to see how they manufacture consent for the idea that progressives have some influence in the Democratic Party? So this is the party line right here. This was Ryan Grimm was one of the reporters on this back in 2016. Here's what changed his mind, and it goes on to talk about how progressives changed his mind. Business Insider, how liberals killed the grand bargain, right? So the proto squad stopped Barack Obama from cutting a deal with Republicans. No, actually, the Republicans killed the deal. This is from 2014. In 2011, in 2012, and in 2013, Obama was willing to adopt a chained consumer price index, which would result in lower payouts of Social Security benefits over time. He would have protected poor seniors. Republicans had long demanded it, citing the sustainability of the nation's retirement entitlements. I want to point out Barry Goldwater, at the height of our economic prosperity, and when the young workers paying into the system to retirees was much better than it is now, he was making the same claims that we had to cut the entitlements because of spending. Obama was willing to do it as part of a grand bargain. His condition was to scale back tax breaks that benefit the wealthy. He made the case to House Speaker John Boehner in 2011 and 2012, and then over and over to Senate Republicans in 2013. Republicans didn't bite. They decided that raising taxes on the wealthy by closing tax expenditures was too much to ask. The GOP refusal to agree to a deal is the reason why Obama's Social Security proposal isn't law. In fact, though he's not including it in his budget, Obama says the offer is still on the table. This was in 2014. So if the Republicans had agreed to it, there would have been Social Security cuts then. So I don't want to say it's just the Republicans. The Democrats have played in this sandbox too. So here's Elon proposing $2 trillion by 2026. Now, I don't know if this was before he came back. It seems like he said he couldn't do $2 trillion, but then I think he recommitted to it. Elon Musk's ambitious push to reinvent government spending with Silicon Valley powerhouses. Now, there are very few places in the federal budget where you could get anywhere near the kind of money you would need to get to make $2 trillion in cuts. This is the 2023 budget. All right, so you got 11% Medicaid, 11% Medicare. You got 8% is interest on the debt. You got defense is 12, non-defense discretionary 15, Social Security is 20. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that is 42% of the federal budget. That is one of the only places where you could get the kind of money that he's talking about. I don't even know that you could really get that. Well, you couldn't get that all from defense, all of that money from defense.
Right.
So let's see here. This is the 2024 proposed budget. Final budget probably landed pretty close to that. So you can see in this pie chart, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, basically the same thing, right? Interest on the debt, defense. Okay, so really, if you want that kind of money, you kind of got to get to that. However, they got a problem. They got a big problem, and this is the same problem that Republicans who have been trying to kill this since it was proposed in 1935. They've been trying to kill it since it was first put before them. It's wildly popular. It is wildly popular. Now, this is a poll from relatively recently, 2023. I wouldn't think it's changed drastically since then. Wide opposition to Social Security and Medicare cut. So in order to pay for Medicare, 58% want to increase taxes on households earning over $400,000 a year to pay for Medicare. That's not even about Social Security. That's just Medicare. Raising the eligibility age for Medicare benefits from 65 to 67. Only 15% of people support that. 70% oppose it. Increasing Medicare premiums, 67% opposed, 10% for. Raising the eligibility age for Social Security benefits from 67 to 70, 10% for it, 75% against it. Reducing the size of Social Security benefits, 6% for, 79% against. So that is what they call in the business a political stinker. That is why it hasn't been done, even though you have all of these Republicans. Since 1935, it's almost 100 years they've been opposing Social Security.
Almost as unpopular as trans shows in Bangladesh.
Oh, well, the IRI is trying to change that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so here's the other place that maybe you could go for some of that money. Haven't heard much about that. Now, this is my prediction, and I want to say this so that aficionados of A. Chud don't come after me when it happens. I'm betting they're going to go to the Pentagon. They're going to point out some weapons programs that are antiquated and they're spending too much on. They're not actually going to cut any of the Pentagon budget. They're going to divert that money to Palantir, to Tesla, and to the rest of their criminal friends. But in the meantime, they'll be telling people they're cleaning up corruption at the Pentagon and waste at the Pentagon. They're going to re-divert that money to themselves. But for now, you would think if you're trying to root out corruption, you're trying to root out waste, you'd make a beeline for the Pentagon, right? Pentagon can account for 63% of nearly $4 trillion in assets. You would think you'd go right there. Pentagon fails 7th audit in a row. Beeline for the Pentagon, but no, that's not what they did. Instead, what they're doing is rifling through these government agencies, the Department of the Treasury, Department of Agriculture, Department of State, when that total civilian federal agencies that they're setting their teenage squad of crackerjack detectives on is $303.2 billion, whereas the Department of Defense gets $456 billion. You'd think they'd go there first, but for some reason they didn't go there first. Oh, maybe that's the reason. Elon is a defense contractor. Elon gets a lot of money from the Department of Defense. Maybe that's why he didn't go there first. He's not getting a lot of money for Bangladesh trans dance performances, but he is getting a lot of money from the Department of Defense. So that might be why he hasn't stopped by to say hello with a fruit basket yet. So, hey, people are overwhelmingly against messing with these programs. So how are you going to get them on your side? How are you going to get them to agree to these cuts that Republicans have been trying to make for 90 years, trying to shut this down? You tell people, somebody's getting away with something. There's a lot of fraud in the system. Now maybe you can have a conversation, right? So it's not the Pentagon. It's not the Pentagon, according to Elon, that has failed 7 audits, that has what is it, 66% of its 63% of its $4 trillion in assets that it can't account for. It's not there. It is Medicare and Medicaid, according to Elon. Yeah, this is where the big money fraud is happening. In response to a headline, DOGE aides search Medicare agency payment systems for fraud. Not the Pentagon. It's Medicare and Medicaid, which are wildly popular and people don't want touched. Musk team accesses Medicare, Medicaid records. And this, he just tweeted this out yesterday. At this point, I am 100% certain that the magnitude of the fraud in federal entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, disability, etc., exceeds the combined sum of every private scam you've ever heard by far. By far, it's not even close. It's more than the Nigerian prince scams, more than any scam you ever heard of. Now, this is an old Republican trick. When they want to cut something, they will tell you that somebody's getting something for free. A pioneer in this technique was the Gipper himself with his famous welfare queen formulation, which I just learned researching this. He didn't actually say those words. That was a newspaper invention, welfare queen. But the effect of it was there in his words.
Yeah, kind of like let them
Chicago,
eat cake.
they found a woman who holds the record. She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veterans' husbands, as well as welfare. Her tax-free cash income alone has been running $150,000 a year.
And he didn't.
Okay, so now how do you get people up in arms? It's a very basic instinct, right? Oh, somebody's getting away with something while you're working hard. This person is a layabout. So this is what they're doing. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, wildly popular programs, wildly popular. How are you going to get people to agree to let you start messing with those systems? Well, now you got them all primed about, oh, look what we're finding at the Department of the Treasury. Look at all of this waste. They've already got people primed up to just be completely uncritical of any claims that they make. Now they got you good and lubed up, right? This is the end game. Now they're going to jam the big dick in your ass. They got you lubed up with the U.S. aid and all that, right? That's what this is really all about. They've been trying to do this for 90 years. They've got you just knee-jerk. Yeah, there's waste, there's fraud. How many? Okay, suppose there are immigrants getting Social Security. How many do you think that is? Like, how common a problem do you really think that is?
Of course.
But once they get people screaming, yeah, we got to stop the fraud and waste, now they can do what they've always wanted to do. And you know who warned you that they always wanted to do this? The late, the great George Carlin. 20 years ago this year was this monologue.
They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club.
Yep. He was a prophet. He warned you about this 20 years ago. And they've been trying. They've been trying, right? Right after he did that, George Bush made his proposal for privatizing Social Security. He was going to give it to Wall Street. That's what they want to do. Every technique, every tactic, every bit of propaganda they've tried to convince people to get behind cutting Medicare and Social Security has failed. So now they're going welfare queen. Only now it's going to be the immigration queen.
Exactly.
You got all these immigrants who are getting the Social Security, and just like people without even understanding what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is, all of a sudden they're experts talking about what a terrible organization it was because Humpty Dumpty said so on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan uncritically said, "Really? Tell me more." Now everybody, oh yeah, no, we got to, Elizabeth Warren started it, so Pocahontas, well, it must be a terrible organization, even though I know absolutely nothing about this organization that gave over $20 million back to consumers, $20 billion actually, back to consumers. I know nothing about it, but it's terrible. Now this is a little harder because people know what Social Security is. They know what Medicare is, but they've never had so many people primed to cut their own throats.
Yep.
Ever.
And by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. It'll be too late. If you're collecting disability and you are cheering on what's going on now at DOGE, it's going to be too late.
Yep.
By the time some 19-year-old Afrikaner pool boy decides you don't need that disability anymore, it's going to be too late. It's going to be gone.
Right.
It's going to be gone.
Right.
And Trump doesn't have to be reelected. He's going to try and pass the ball to J.D. Vance. The Democrats are in shambles. Who is going to stop them at this point? Who is going to stop them at this point? They have tricked you into cheering for your own destruction, into cheering for your own demise. And this kind of grievance is what they use every single time. And this time, that grievance is being amplified by the very platform owned by the very man who is in a position to make these cuts. How you do not see this as a clear and present danger to your own well-being is beyond me, unless you're fucking rich. If you're rich, I understand it.
Sure.
If you're a working person, you have to be incredibly self-destructive to cheer this on. Incredibly self-destructive. This is obviously the Holy Grail. This is obviously what they wanted to do
for
all
90 years.
along. For almost 100 years at this point. Elon Musk's political hero is not Donald Trump. It is Javier Milei. What's the poverty rate in Argentina now? 53%. He idolizes the man. That is what they intend on doing here. These people mean you harm, severe harm. And to see people just propagandized to the point where they could cheer this on, it is pathetic. It is really pathetic. I mean, this country is done. It's washed. That's what George Carlin said shortly before he died. The country is finished. It's over. And it is. It is. There's no pulling back from the brink. You know, there is no majoritarian solution to this through the democratic system at this point. You know, you can make wins with an organized workforce, just like the Dock workers did. You know, Trump gave them the win on the AI because he felt he had to. Right? They need a system to preside over.
Well,
the only way to do this is to shut the whole thing down.
That's it.
Shut the whole thing down. That's it. You have no other choice in this moment. You know, I was talking with a friend of ours who we've had on the show many times, who was talking about liberal constitutionalism. If you're going to be on the right side of history at this moment, that's what you have to advocate for. And I said that and that alone is a non-starter. That's what how we got here. That's what this whole past decade has really proven, that the Democrats ran on maintaining liberal constitutionalism for its own sake. And what did people do? They traded that in the hope of getting something to eat, as FDR said in the clip we played last time. So that ship has sailed. But it is so mind-boggling to me that people are this submissive to these people. It has always been, since I was a kid, I didn't understand it. Since I was a kid. Don't you watch, when you're a kid and you watch a cartoon or a movie or something, the rich, greedy prick is always the bad guy in the movie.
Not anymore.
Right. The rich, greedy prick is always the bad guy. Or what? You lost sight of that? What? You got convinced into thinking, no, they're the good guys. They mean you well. And it's the beggar who's the bad guy. It's the poor person who's the bad guy. It just requires, such a perversion of your understanding of the world and of like the human experience. I mean, it is really a pathetic thing to see, and now we're seeing it in overdrive.
It's a society of very broken people.
Yes.
And this is what we've been warning about ever since they sabotaged the Sanders campaign. Whatever you think of Bernie Sanders, those basic social democratic policies were the only thing that might have stopped this. Anyone who was really paying attention knew what we had was not sustainable, that the country was going to break populist left. And if you didn't let them do that, it was going to break populist right. And after what happened in 2016, it seemed pretty clear it was going to go populist right because the system could live with that. That's part of what's, I think a lot of people don't understand about this current moment. In the end, what Trump is doing, there's a wing of the oligarchy that doesn't like the way they're going about it. They don't like the aesthetics of it. But in the end, they'll take it over social democratic reforms. In the end is what they're about. Now, you want to see how neoliberalism primed people for this. Going back to what you're saying, the rich person's the bad guy. Not anymore. When I used to do my tours of Central Park, you stop by the Dakota where John Lennon was shot. And I always made the point, one of the reasons John Lennon is dead is because he didn't have bodyguards. And he didn't have bodyguards because he felt it was classist. He felt it was pompous to walk around with bodyguards. Today, you got a show like Entourage, which it's not on the air anymore, but that celebrates it. What if you tried to put a show like that on the air in like 1972? Everybody would be like, this guy's an asshole. Guys, I hope something bad happens to this guy. The idea that you would have shows that celebrate people like that celebrate that kind of opulence. Now, you could say there was a hypocrisy of these very wealthy rock stars who drove around in Rolls Royces pretending to be of the people, but that's a different question. It shows you something about where people's minds were at, what their expectations were. When I was growing up, you had TV series that celebrated union leaders. Carl Malden was in a show called Skag. Norma Ray was a hit at the movies. People have been conditioned largely or partially through the liberal value system to celebrate wealth and to delegate the expression of leftism to lifestyle brand choices, aligning yourself with certain boutique causes, with certain aesthetic expressions. But the celebration of untrammeled wealth has been pushed by the elites of our society. And one wing of that elites eventually wound up losing to the other, but they did more to prime people for celebrating people like Elon than Elon has.
Please clap.